In the main dining room of Sunrise Manor Assisted Living at 6:30 p.m. dinner time, 78-year-old Dorothy, Iron Lady, Chen sat at her usual table. The other residents at the four-person table were 82-year-old Frank Rodriguez, former Sergeant First Class, Vietnam veteran, 80-year-old Martha Williams, former Navy Communications Specialist, 79-year-old Robert Thompson, former Army Logistics Officer, and 77-year-old Sarah Mitchell, former Army medic. They had all been eating together for the past 3 years, but none knew of the others' military backgrounds. As Dorothy arranged her salad plate, she heard sounds from the lobby, footsteps outside normal visiting hours. Sharp. Coordinated. Military movement pattern. The moment she looked up, 3 masked men entered through the main entrance. Black clothing, tactical vests, professional weapons. Dorothy's 35 years of Marine experience kicked in immediately. This wasn't random crime, it was organized, professional, planned assault. Dorothy lowered her voice and whispered to her tablemates, "Listen carefully. Frank, you're tactical. Martha, communications. Robert, logistics. Sarah, medical." The others looked confused. Dorothy's voice had completely changed. The gentle grandmother voice was gone, replaced by command authority. Martha's eyes widened, she recognized that voice from radio communications. Frank's posture straightened, he'd recognized the command structure. Robert automatically began scanning the environment for tactical assessment. Sarah checked her hands, ready for medical response. Dorothy continued, her voice now completely in Colonel Chen tone, "This is Colonel Chen reactivating Sunshine Squad. We have 60+ civilians to protect and a facility to defend. Our mission, neutralize threats, protect residents, maintain operational security until backup arrives." Around the table, 4 pairs of elderly eyes lit up, muscle memory was kicking in. Frank quietly, "Ma'am, what's our tactical situation?" Martha, "Communication protocols, Colonel." Robert, "Resource assessment needed." Sarah, "Medical readiness confirmed." Dorothy smiled, after 40 years, the team was together again. "Semper Fi?" Dorothy asked. 5 elderly voices whispered in unison, "Semper Fi." Sunshine Squad reactivated. Mission, protect their home. Smash that subscribe button if you're obsessed with badass senior citizens, hidden veteran networks, and nursing home residents who turn out to be military legends. Was this just a retirement community or a dormant tactical unit? How will wheelchairs become weapons and medication time become mission briefing? Drop your wildest theories below and destroy that like button. Every like tells us you want more insane stories about veterans who never truly retire. For 3 years, Dorothy Chen had been living at Sunrise Manor, believing she was the only military veteran among the residents. She had kept her background quiet, not out of shame, but because she'd learned that civilians often didn't understand the warrior mentality that never truly retired. But as her tablemates responded to her commands with automatic military precision, Dorothy realized she had been surrounded by fellow veterans who had been hiding in plain sight just as she had. Frank Rodriguez moved his walker with the same tactical awareness he'd once used on patrol in the Mekong Delta. Martha Williams had been adjusting her hearing aids not because of deafness, but to monitor multiple conversation frequencies simultaneously. Robert Thompson's daily medication routine followed the same logistical precision he'd used to supply forward operating bases. Sarah Mitchell's gentle care for other residents came from decades of battlefield medicine. They weren't just elderly people marking time until death. They were a dormant military unit that had been activated by crisis. "Colonel," Frank whispered, "I count 3 hostiles at main entrance, but movement patterns suggest additional personnel." Martha adjusted her hearing aid and tilted her head. "Picking up radio chatter. They're coordinating with outside elements. This is bigger than a simple robbery." Robert was already conducting tactical assessment. Facility layout, 2 floors, 4 wings, 6 exit points. 63 residents, 12 staff members on evening shift. Medical equipment available for improvised defensive purposes. Sarah opened her purse and pulled out what appeared to be arthritis medication, but her movements suggested she was actually accessing emergency medical supplies. "Colonel, what's our estimated time until law enforcement response?" Dorothy felt a surge of pride in her impromptu team. Age might have slowed their bodies, but their minds remained tactically sharp. "Team, based on location and response protocols, we're looking at minimum 15 minutes for police arrival. These hostiles are professionals, they'll be gone before backup arrives unless we delay them." "Rules of engagement?" Frank asked. Dorothy looked around the dining room at her fellow residents. Mrs. Patterson, 89 years old, who had been a schoolteacher for 50 years. Mr. Kim, 85, who had built a successful engineering firm. Mrs. O'Brien, 91, who had raised 6 children and volunteered at the hospital for decades. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians who deserved to live out their golden years in peace and safety. Rules of engagement: protect civilian lives at all costs. We're not here to be heroes. We're here to be guardians. While other residents began to notice the disturbance and staff members tried to maintain calm, Sunshine Squad conducted a professional threat assessment that would have impressed active-duty military personnel. Dorothy's command experience allowed her to coordinate the team's diverse skills into a cohesive defense strategy. Frank's infantry background provided tactical movement and engagement expertise. Martha's communications specialty gave them information warfare capabilities. Robert's logistical knowledge helped them understand resources and supply lines. Sarah's medical training ensured they could treat casualties and maintain operational effectiveness. "Martha, what's the intel on hostile intentions?" Dorothy asked. Martha had positioned herself near the staff communications station, where she could monitor both facility internal communications and intercept hostile radio traffic. "Colonel, they're not here for random robbery. They're targeting specific residents, high-value individuals with significant assets. This is organized crime, not opportunistic theft." Dorothy felt the tactical picture becoming clearer. Sunrise Manor wasn't just any assisted living facility. It was home to retired executives, former government officials, successful professionals. People with substantial financial assets and family connections that could be exploited. Robert, resource assessment. Robert had been mentally cataloging everything in the facility that could serve dual purposes. Colonel, medical equipment includes oxygen tanks, wheelchairs that can serve as mobile cover, walking frames that could be improvised weapons. Kitchen facilities have potential for area denial. Elevator systems can be controlled for tactical advantage. Sarah, medical readiness. Sarah had already identified residents with critical medical needs and positioned herself where she could provide emergency care. Colonel, 17 residents require daily medication, 6 use oxygen support, 4 have mobility limitations that would prevent evacuation. We need to defend in place rather than attempt evacuation. Dorothy nodded approvingly. Her team was thinking like the experienced military professionals they had once been. Frank, tactical recommendation. Frank had been observing the hostile movement patterns while appearing to simply adjust his walker. Colonel, 3 hostiles are maintaining perimeter control while additional personnel move through residential areas. They're using professional search patterns. My recommendation: we use facility layout to create defensive positions and delay their operations until law enforcement arrives. Dorothy made her command decision. Sunshine Squad, we're implementing protective overwatch protocol. Frank, establish defensive positions. Martha, maintain communications monitoring and emergency contact with law enforcement. Robert, secure critical resources and establish fallback positions. Sarah, prepare for casualty treatment and medical support. The 4 elderly veterans nodded and began moving with purpose that would have surprised anyone who thought they were just fragile senior citizens. What happened next would have been impossible to believe for anyone who hadn't witnessed it personally. 5 elderly residents transformed the Sunrise Manor Assisted Living facility into a tactical environment that would have challenged professional military units. Dorothy used her command authority to coordinate not just her veteran team, but the entire resident population. Without revealing the full extent of the threat, she began organizing evacuation procedures that were actually defensive positioning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dorothy announced to the dining room, "we're implementing an emergency safety protocol. Please move to your assigned areas and wait for further instructions." To the civilians, it sounded like standard emergency management. To Sunshine Squad, it was tactical deployment. Frank positioned himself where he could observe multiple approach routes while appearing to simply rest in his wheelchair. His arthritis medication was actually a secure communication device that allowed him to coordinate with Dorothy. Martha established herself at the communications center, where she could monitor hostile radio traffic while appearing to help staff with emergency procedures. Her decades of Navy communications training allowed her to interpret tactical chatter and predict hostile movements. Robert began securing critical resources throughout the facility. To observers, he was helping staff with emergency supplies. In reality, he was establishing supply caches and creating obstacles that would slow hostile advancement. Sarah positioned herself where she could provide medical support while maintaining tactical awareness. Her Army medic training had taught her to treat casualties under fire, and she was prepared to do the same in a nursing home setting. Dorothy moved through the facility coordinating the defense, appearing to simply check on residents while actually establishing a command and control network that utilized the building's architecture for maximum tactical advantage. The hostiles had expected to face helpless elderly people and overwhelmed staff members. Instead, they were encountering organized resistance from professionals who had spent decades learning how to protect civilian populations under hostile conditions. The confrontation began when two of the hostiles attempted to access the residential wing where many of the wealthiest residents lived. They expected to find frightened elderly people who would comply with demands for financial information and valuable items. Instead, they found Frank Rodriguez positioned in his wheelchair at a corridor intersection, appearing to doze but actually controlling access to the entire wing. "Excuse me, sir," one of the hostiles said, "we need you to move along." Frank looked up with the confused expression of an elderly man awakened from a nap. "Oh, sorry. Is it medication time already?" "Just move your wheelchair, old man." Frank began fumbling with his wheelchair controls, appearing to have difficulty operating the electric motor. To the hostiles, he looked like a helpless old man having technical difficulties. In reality, Frank was buying time while communicating the hostile positions to Dorothy through hand signals that looked like random gestures. "Having trouble with this thing," Frank said, continuing to block the corridor. "These new electric wheelchairs are so complicated." The hostiles grew impatient and attempted to push Frank's wheelchair aside. That was their mistake. Frank Rodriguez might have been 82 years old, but he was also a former infantry sergeant who had survived combat in Vietnam by never underestimating any threat. When the hostile reached for his wheelchair, Frank's response was swift and professional. The hostile found himself restrained using techniques that Frank had learned in military police training, secured with medical tubing that Sarah had provided, and positioned where he could be monitored without alerting his colleagues. One down. Unknown number remaining. While Frank was neutralizing the first threat, Martha Williams was conducting her own form of warfare from the communications center. Her Navy training had taught her that information was often more powerful than weapons, and she was using every electronic capability available to gain tactical advantage over the hostiles. Martha had accessed the facility's security camera system, giving Sunshine Squad real-time intelligence on hostile positions throughout the building. She had also managed to intercept hostile radio communications, providing advance warning of their movements and intentions. Most importantly, Martha had established secure communications with law enforcement, providing them with detailed information about the threat while coordinating Sunshine Squad's defensive actions. "Dorothy, this is Martha," she whispered into her communication device. "Hostile team leader is moving toward the administrative offices. They're looking for resident financial records." "Copy, Martha." "Frank, can you intercept?" "Already moving, Colonel." Martha also began using the facility's public address system to provide information that sounded like standard emergency announcements but actually contained tactical intelligence for her team. "Attention residents," Martha announced, "please remain in your rooms. Maintenance personnel are working on electrical systems in sectors 2 and 4. To civilians, it was a routine announcement. To Sunshine Squad, it was intelligence that hostiles were operating in specific areas of the building. The hostiles began to realize that their communications were being monitored and their movements tracked, but they couldn't identify the source of the intelligence leak. They were being outmaneuvered by people they had dismissed as harmless elderly residents. Robert Thompson was proving that military logistics skills remained valuable long after retirement. His understanding of resource management and supply chain operations was critical to Sunshine Squad's defensive strategy. Robert had identified every piece of equipment in the facility that could serve tactical purposes. Medical oxygen tanks became area denial devices. Wheelchairs provided mobile cover. Kitchen equipment offered improvised weapons. Elevator controls allowed tactical movement restriction. But Robert's most important contribution was his understanding of timing and resource allocation. He knew that Sunshine Squad couldn't sustain extended combat operations, but they didn't need to. They only needed to delay hostile operations until law enforcement arrived. "Dorothy, this is Robert," he reported through their secure communications. "I've secured the medication storage area and established fallback positions in the recreational wing. Also, I've disabled the main elevator to limit hostile mobility between floors." "Outstanding work, Robert. How are our medical supplies?" "Sarah has everything she needs for casualty treatment, and I've established emergency supply caches in 3 locations." Robert's logistics expertise was proving that military skills translated perfectly to civilian protective operations. The same attention to detail that had kept forward operating bases supplied and operational was now keeping Sunrise Manor's residents safe and protected. Sarah Mitchell was demonstrating that military medical training never becomes obsolete. Her Army medic experience had taught her to provide medical care under hostile conditions, and she was applying those skills to protect her fellow residents. Sarah had prepared for multiple scenarios, treating residents who might be injured during the incident, providing medical support for Sunshine Squad operations, and managing the medical needs of residents who required regular care regardless of tactical situations. "Dorothy, this is Sarah," she reported. "Mrs. Patterson in room 247 needs her heart medication, but I can't reach her location due to hostile presence in that wing. Sarah, maintain position. Frank will clear the route." Sarah was also providing tactical support by using her medical knowledge to assess hostile capabilities and limitations. Her understanding of human anatomy and physiology gave Sunshine Squad intelligence about the most effective ways to neutralize threats without causing permanent harm. "Colonel, hostile team leader appears to be favoring his left leg. Previous injury, possibly military-related. He'll have reduced mobility if pressured." Sarah's medical expertise was proving invaluable for both protecting residents and supporting tactical operations. As the situation developed, Dorothy faced the kind of command decision that had defined her military career, when to escalate from defensive to offensive operations. Sunshine Squad had successfully delayed hostile operations and protected most of the facility's residents. Law enforcement was en route. The tactical situation favored continued defensive operations. But 3 hostiles remained active, and they were becoming increasingly desperate as their timeline was disrupted. Desperate criminals often made dangerous decisions that could endanger civilian lives. Dorothy gathered intelligence from her team and made her assessment. "Sunshine Squad, this is Colonel Chen. Intelligence indicates hostiles are preparing to take residents as hostages to facilitate their escape. We're shifting from defensive to protective action protocols." "Copy, Colonel," came the responses from her team. Dorothy's decision was based on military experience that had taught her when defensive operations needed to become protective action. The safety of innocent civilians always took priority over operational caution. "Frank, neutralize remaining hostiles using minimum necessary force. Martha, coordinate with law enforcement for tactical support. Robert, secure critical residents in protected areas. Sarah, prepare for emergency medical response." Sunshine Squad moved from defensive positions to active protection with the coordinated efficiency of a military unit that had trained together for decades. The conclusion of the Sunrise Manor incident would be studied by law enforcement agencies as an example of how civilian populations could effectively resist organized criminal operations. Frank Rodriguez used his infantry training to systematically neutralize the remaining hostiles using non-lethal techniques that left them secured for law enforcement processing. His age might have slowed his physical capabilities, but his tactical knowledge remained sharp and effective. Martha Williams coordinated with arriving law enforcement to ensure they had complete intelligence about the facility layout, hostile positions, and civilian locations. Her communications expertise prevented the confusion that often complicated multi-agency emergency responses. Robert Thompson's logistical coordination ensured that all residents were accounted for and that critical medical and safety systems remained operational throughout the incident. His resource management prevented the secondary casualties that often resulted from emergency situations. Sarah Mitchell provided medical care for residents who had been affected by the stress of the incident while also treating the minor injuries sustained by hostiles during their apprehension. Her medical professionalism ensured that everyone received appropriate care regardless of their role in the incident. Dorothy Chen coordinated the entire operation with the command expertise that had made her a successful Marine officer. Her leadership ensured that all objectives were accomplished, hostile operations were disrupted, civilian casualties were prevented, and law enforcement response was facilitated. When FBI agents arrived to investigate what appeared to be a simple robbery at an assisted living facility, they found a scene that challenged their assumptions about elderly residents and nursing home security. "Ma'am," Special Agent Lisa Torres said to Dorothy, "can you explain how 5 elderly residents managed to neutralize a professional criminal organization?" Dorothy looked around at her team, Frank adjusting his wheelchair, Martha organizing her hearing aids, Robert checking his walker, Sarah arranging her medication, and realized that their secret was finally out. "Agent Torres, we're not just elderly residents. We're retired military personnel who never forgot our oath to protect innocent people." "What was your background, Mrs. Chen?" "Colonel Dorothy Chen, United States Marine Corps, retired. 35 years of service, including 3 combat deployments and command of multiple units specializing in civilian protection operations." Agent Torres looked at the other 4 members of Sunshine Squad. "And the rest of your team?" Frank spoke up, Sergeant First Class Frank Rodriguez, United States Army, Vietnam veteran. "Infantry and military police." Martha added. "Petty Officer First Class Martha Williams, United States Navy. Communications and Intelligence Specialist." Robert continued, Major Robert Thompson, United States Army. Logistics and Supply Operations. Sarah concluded, Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, United States Army. Combat Medic and Emergency Medical Specialist. Agent Torres was beginning to understand. "You're telling me that this assisted living facility houses a collection of military veterans with specialized combat and support skills?" Dorothy smiled. "Agent Torres, we're telling you that military service doesn't end with retirement. It just finds new ways to serve." 6 months later, Sunrise Manor Assisted Living had become the most secure senior care facility in the state, not because of enhanced security systems, but because word had spread through certain circles that the facility was home to a group of retired military personnel who took community protection seriously. Sunshine Squad had become semi-official consultants for facility security, using their combined expertise to develop protocols that protected vulnerable senior populations throughout the region. But more importantly, they had discovered that retirement didn't mean the end of purpose. It meant finding new ways to use their skills in service of their community. Dorothy continued to serve as the informal leader of Sunshine Squad, but now she also served as a consultant for other senior living facilities that wanted to develop veteran-friendly programs. Frank had started teaching personal safety classes for elderly residents, using his military experience to help seniors feel more confident and secure. Martha had become the facility's unofficial communications coordinator, ensuring that all residents had access to emergency communications and that staff could coordinate effectively during any type of crisis. Robert had revolutionized the facility's logistics and supply management, applying military efficiency to civilian care operations. Sarah had developed medical emergency protocols that combined military field medicine with geriatric care, creating systems that could handle everything from routine medical needs to crisis response. Together, they had proven that military service was a lifetime commitment that found new expressions in civilian life. "You know," Dorothy said during one of their weekly team meetings, "I thought retirement meant the end of my military career." "And now?" Frank asked. "Now I understand that it just meant the beginning of the most important mission of our lives, protecting the people we love and the community we've chosen as our home." Martha raised her coffee cup. "To Sunshine Squad. To protecting our own," Robert added. "To serving where we're needed," Sarah continued. "To proving that heroes don't retire," Dorothy concluded. "They just find new battles to fight." 5 elderly residents of Sunrise Manor Assisted Living raised their coffee cups in salute, understanding that they had found the perfect final assignment, protecting a community that had become their family. Some soldiers serve their country on foreign battlefields. Others serve their neighbors in nursing home dining rooms. Sunshine Squad had learned that both forms of service required the same courage, the same dedication, and the same willingness to put others before yourself. And in a world where elderly people were often seen as helpless and dependent, they had proven that age was just a number, experience was invaluable, and military training never expired. The best retirement gift they could give themselves was the knowledge that they were still serving, still protecting, and still making a difference in the lives of people who needed guardians. Because some squads never truly disband. They just find new missions worthy of their skills, their experience, and their unbreakable commitment to protecting innocent people. Sunshine Squad had found their final mission, proving that heroism doesn't end with retirement, it just gets more personal.